when developer advocacy started becoming popular, blew up and really became very popular. It's been a thing from the 90s, early 2000s and all of that, but it really kind of like blew up. I think around, when was that? 2018, 2019, 2020. Yeah. It was this whole, where like the cool guys, you can't sit with us type of culture, and there wasn't much. It became like having like a developer advocacy team was more of a signaling thing for companies that, oh, we're cool now. They were just having developer advocacy teams as to give off that signal of like, we're cool now. And then a lot of developer advocates also went into that vibe without trying to like solidify their positions as like strategic partners and not as a thing to dangle in front of other people and be like, yeah, we're cool now, we have a developer advocacy team because everybody has it. And at that point, teams weren't taking time to really define what they wanted out of developer advocacy, because again, it goes back to the whole, it was more of a signaling thing. It was just, we're cool now, so do anything, be everywhere, make noise on X, make noise, what is now Twitter, make noise on Twitter, go on Reddit, attend conferences and all of that. Nobody was asking, okay, but how is this, going back to our balance sheet? How is this really tying back into what the company wants to do right now? What the goals that the company is focused on, the KPIs and all of that. Nobody was questioning that. And that's why when I think it was around 2020, 2021 that COVID happened and companies started to like lose much of their revenue and like lose funding, and then they started to ask that question. It was now like, oh, we need to be very, cutthroat. Anything that's not, and that's why like during that period, a lot of developer advocates were laid off because it was a nice to have department. And that isn't to say that the work that developer advocates were doing at that point was not tying into business outcomes or like tying positively into the business. It was more that nobody was really concerned or like pressured to tie back what they were doing to business outcome. And so it was easy to see it as a fun to have department. Meanwhile, they were really doing like serious work of like getting developers to be excited about it, to try it out, adopt it, test it out, talk about it with their team members, and probably eventually adopt it into production. And this is one of the things I tell my mentees now when they're trying to like get into developer advocates roles or like interview. I tell them one thing you should watch out for because if you go and join a team that doesn't see developer advocacy as a strategic function, you're going to suffer a lot. And how to know that is that in many companies, sales and products and even marketing would sit in strategic conversations by default. And when they are done with that conversation, then strands of it will now trickle out to DevRel. And then you now have to, like kind of figure out what to do with the things that have trickled out to you. Meanwhile, DevRel is supposed to have a set seat at these strategy conversations, because remember, it's a two-way function. You're speaking to developers. You are supposed to be the closest ears to developers. You're supposed to know. And if developers are the core users of a company's product, you are supposed to be in those strategy meetings because you know, probably even more than the product person, what these people need, what would work for them, what will convert to revenue for the company, because so many people that the community you're plugged into has given you signals that this is the next phase we're going into. But then if you're going into a company and you're interviewing for them and you just discover that they are leaving DevRel out of these conversations, is a big red flag. If at that point you can't convince them to give you a seat at that table, just know that all your time at that company, you're going to spend it trying to prove the value of the work that you're doing, and they will always see you as like an add-on. My advice is just to save yourself the stress and look for a job elsewhere. But yeah, that's really how we got there. And to fix that, every person getting into DevRel right now has to, even as a junior developer advocate, usually if you're joining a team, it's okay, great to still have this knowledge of like metrics and all of that. if you're joining a much more established team with someone senior on the team that cares about metrics, they already have set standards for how to track, and it will trickle down to you. But it's still great to just, even as a junior developer advocate, just know that you have to start thinking strategically. You have to stop thinking about just number of, you ask DevRels, what did you do last year? And they'll be like, oh, I wrote 16 blog posts. Okay, okay. But then you ask marketing, oh, what did you people do last year? Oh, we generated this so and so inbounds, which eventually led to this amount of sign up. That's contributing to speaking the business language. But then you ask Devra, it's like, I wrote 16 blog posts. What did your 16 blog posts do? How many people saw it? How many people read it? When they read it, did anybody join your community because of reading that blog post? Yeah, so that's just it.
I really like that you pointed out some of these issues, because frankly, I got into DevRel around the same time when there was a lot of hype around it. And I think I didn't even realize I was doing DevRel until someone was like, this is what you're doing. And then, I'm not going to lie, a good amount of what I was focusing on way back then was also content. Because that was the only thing companies often reached out to you for. They're like, oh, I love your articles, you should come and write for us. Or, oh, I love your videos, you should come and do that for us, right? And so it's an issue that I see now, that it was a two-way thing. Companies having their own issues, and then the persons that are getting into this role having this perception that this may be all that I can offer, right? But I think I noticed one significant thing that I pointed out was that developer relation and education as a whole is a strategic function. And I think that's where lots of teams struggle generally, because everyone wants education, but very few people actually want good strategic education, right? And also know what that looks like. So when you look at companies that you have worked with in the past, my question is what separates a simple education from education that genuinely drives business outcomes from one that actually is simply just producing lots of content and lots of videos, or lots of traffic to the website, as it often does?
Yeah. So I worked at Small Step for 3 years as a developer advocacy lead. And when I was first hired, I remember the first conversation I had with my manager and my CEO is, what are we trying to do here? Yes, I know you want to get out there, produce things and all of that, but I don't want to be the person who produces things at the end of my contract with you. When I leave you, I want to be able to point and say, oh, one of my most that I brag about from my time as a developer advocate lead at Small Step was that it wasn't just even only I wasn't even just making what we were building. Okay, let me track back a little bit. So when I had that conversation with my manager and my CEO, one thing they kept telling me was that we're working in a space that is very complex. And something that we've noticed is that every time we try to speak the language of what we're doing, people that we're targeting don't get it, because this thing is so complex, it's so abstract. And we've realized that they don't really care about all this abstraction and complexity, because they were building frontier cryptography tools. And it's like, there are very few people that are, cryptographers and are experts at that. Like, you're building frontier cryptography tools for developers. They don't want to know what you're doing. They don't want to know the maths and all of that, And the first issue that I was able to diagnose was that we had a communication problem. And so that was the first thing I tried to fix. Yes. People did not understand the people that we actually, we had fanboys and who were actual security evangelists, cryptographers, they really associated with what we're doing. They were like, oh my God, but they're not the ones that are buying the tools. They're not the ones that our tool is targeting. We're targeting the IT guy in an office that just wants to get his coffee and be out of work by 5 p.m. He doesn't want to know how cool what we're doing on the back end is. So what I realized exactly was that we had a communication problem. So what I'm trying to say from this is that the way to separate being that person who just puts out content and that person, I've been saying this thing, who uses product education as a growth tool or as a tool for growth, is doing this type of diagnosis. You need to really figure out what is the thing that this company is trying to achieve right now. and then you need to figure out how to create content that ties into that, because at the end of the day, how you get to people is through content, but content can serve different purposes, and that should now influence the type and the focus of the content that you go out creating, and even how you do your community outreach and the places that you are going to spend time in as part of like your community outreach. All of that starts with like diagnosing the business. Before anything, I have like an entire chapter in my book talking about it. It's really long, which is why like top of my head I can't, but it's an entire process to it. There's you trying to like understand your company's market position. Are they market leaders? The blog post I put out like a couple days ago addressed that. As a market leader, you have a company like maybe say let me open up that blog post. I'll just kind of draw from it, and I can give
Sure.
a lot more concrete examples that don't have to come off the.
And I think to even like chip into that, another thing that I notice is when people create content, they don't know who the content is expected to target. There are products that
Exactly.
serve developers, and then there are those that while they serve developers, they have to go through the higher hierarchy before developers can even,
Exactly.
you know,
Yes.
when you're doing
Exactly.
content and you also don't think about this, it kind of affects the content at the end of the day, because it might be content, but it might not be useful to the people that.
Useful. Exactly. That's it. That's it. Like that's just having. Yes, you're putting out stuff, but what you're putting out, is it useful? Is it really helping the company in any way? And what you just said about like using the tool may be used by developers, but it's not developers that actually buy it. Yes, that's actually very so in my book there's a section where it's called like you need to learn who is in the room, which is something that you need to learn who the product is for. And then when you learn who the product is for, you need to now understand beyond who the product is for,
Mm-hmm.
who is in the room. So you would have someone who is like an initiator, someone who spots the problem and brings the tool to the team. You would have someone who is an implementer. It can be the same person as the initiator, the same person as another person. The person who tries this first, integrates it, figures out if it works with the setup that the team currently has. You would have the influencer, someone who would advocate and say, oh, we've had this problem for ages, and I think that this tool can fix it. Let's try this tool. And then you have someone who is the approver or the buyer, who is the person that will literally bring out the budget and say yes, and then pay for the tool. And then you have like a supporter or a champion. This can be all the same person, but then it's to actually create content that drives output, that drives growth. You need to figure these things out, and now figure out in the midst of all these people who are involved in getting this tool from it just being a hobbyist thing that maybe one person in the team tries out to actually being in use, and this is for in use within a team. Who are the people involved in this decision, and who is the person that needs convincing the
The
most?
most.
That might be the person you need to focus on, even for your documentation. Who is the person that needs that convincing the most? That might be the person you need to focus your awareness content on. That might be the person you need to focus your implementation content on, to convince them that this is not going to suck time from your team. This
Yeah.
will get them what they want, get them from point A to point B in a way that is in line with what people expect from you at work. So it all ties into like figuring that out. So there's a lot of diagnosis to do. You like a lot of questions you need to ask yourself, and then from those questions, it's not something I can cover here. I stay writing about it on my blog, so anyone who is curious, just it's everythingtechnicalwriting.com right now, although I have bought the domain everythingpro.education because I started that blog when I was, doing technical writing, content production for content's sake. But right now, my role and like my outlook has moved a lot more to like strategic positioning and using product education for growth. So that's more where my thinking is. That's why I had to like evolve the brand from. So if you type everythingtechnicalwriting.com, you would find it because I will do like a reroute when I finally migrated to everything product education. But yeah, so I'm starting to write about this. It's a whole process, and it's something that if you're joining a team, it would do you so much good as a developer advocate. It would do you so much good to spend like your first 1 week doing exactly like just figuring out what your company is, who is involved, the strategic players, their market position, their current, what they've tried in the past, auditing what they've tried in the past, auditing what other teams are doing. Now, if you want to be a strategic player, you can't be operating in isolation, which is what sometimes DevRels are guilty of. That you're just doing your own thing, and everybody else in the company is focused on doing this. You're doing this. You can't be operating in isolation. You have to figure out a way to attune what you're working on to also point towards the North Star that the rest of the company is working on. So you need to find out what their focus is. Yeah. So my advice would be, if you don't want to buy my book, read my blog.
Please buy the book because there's a lot of gems.
I would be writing it as a series on my blog, and you can just find that. And then at the end, we would have like a strategic analysis workbook that I would make available for download. Alternatively, you can buy my book.
Yeah, and also you can subscribe to the newsletter so that you get.
Oh yeah, so that you get notified. Yes,
an update. You should look out for that. And I think, Linda, I really took something interesting from the whole process. I'm curious, how should teams design the experience, the learning experience, in a way that reduces friction for developers? Because sometimes you're writing a great article, right? The topic makes sense. It's good for traffic because it solves a major problem. But then through the development of that content down to the end, you notice that it doesn't also like hit some of the key metrics. It doesn't reduce time to value for developers. It doesn't help developer experience at any point. It's just another bulk of write up that the developer relations person has put out there. And so how do you think teams can do this for a better experience when it comes to developer education?
So I would take it one by one. Design learning experience in a way that reduces friction for developers. That's one. And then also do that to reduce time to value and accelerate product education. That's another part of it. In the first instance, designing to reduce friction. To reduce friction, you have to know what the friction is first. And this comes from something I usually say is that as a developer advocate, you're supposed to be the alpha user of the tool so you need to really know the ins and outs, the nooks and crannies of your product. Say I'm working for like this fictional company, and we just kind of like launched a feature that I want to, and the main focus for the team is to really make more people aware of that feature, or to get existing users that we have to adopt the feature and try it out. First things would be to audit the onboarding and the usage of that feature the way a new user would. And I think that developer advocates that do not get involved in like the engineering process and like the product will have like an advantage, because you don't have the knowledge cost or like the attachment cost where it's like, because you were so involved in bringing this thing to life, you're really attached to the way it works, and it's difficult for you to take feedback on it or like see faults and loopholes with it. So you would start with like testing that feature out, like the way new user will try everything, try to break things. That when I really pick up features, that's how I would be an alpha tester for it, like run everything end to end, note exactly where you would like get confused, like, oh, what am I supposed to do here? And if it's possible, try to do it with the documentation from the engineers or without at all, just to make sure that you're giving yourself an opportunity to catch a lot more areas that you would get stuck and you would wonder, okay, but what's going on here? And then also take note of the moments where you're like, oh, okay, now I understand what this is doing. Oh, this is why this is important. Take note of those time to wow, so that when you're producing content around that feature, those are the first things that you surface. Because if you want a developer to stick through getting something done, you need to give them like that dopamine immediate rush. And that's why a lot of documentations have like quick starts. It's like, yes, don't try to like get into the nitty gritty yet, see how we can wow you to show this is awesome. Now I'm invested. I want to get, into it. I want to dedicate more time into it. So when you're testing it out, look out for those areas that you're like, oh my God, this is really cool. And when you're creating around that, make sure that you surface those moments and those areas first. Then while you're testing, you're definitely going to spot areas of friction. It's now left, depending on how your team works, do you take that friction back to them? If it's something that is product focused, like the friction is really around product and not something that, your content can fix or like it can document and let people bypass that. If it's about product, do you take it back to product and would they prioritize getting that fix out as quickly as possible? Or is the friction like something that you can mend or like make easier with how you structure that piece of content? So that's one way to reduce friction. Another way it's also you need to really understand and this go back to the developer's first point, which is like you need to really understand what job a developer would pick up that feature, that product for. What is the thing that they are trying to like get done in that very moment? You need to understand that and you need to surface that, because that should be your wow points that will now get them dedicated to spend more time to figure out how to really fine tune and customize that stuff for themselves. And in a way, I think that now ties back to reducing time to value, because it's a psychological thing. When that wow factor comes in and those dopamine and like, people tend to like be a lot more lenient to dedicate their time to figure stuff out, because they've gotten like an idea of, oh, this is how, this is exciting, this is interesting, and now they're a lot more willing. But if you delay getting them to that wow point, it's easier for them to drop off and just ghost the entire thing. So I think that ties back to reducing time to value and accelerating product education. It's In summary, I think my answer is text your product to discover the friction points and figure out if those friction points are points there are some friction that you encounter, and it's something that you can easily let other people avoid through the way the documentation is structured. You can guide other people towards bypassing that, or it's something that product really has to fix, and that's where you need to now get back to product. And that's why, again, DevRel team should not be working in isolation. You should have access to the product team and engineering team and be able to like put things on their linear board and get them to like prioritize it. And have, in a chapter in my book, I talk about how you should have a supporter or a sponsor on core teams. First of all, you should have someone who you're really close to in some way in the engineering team and in the product team. Because when things like this happen, that it ties to your work where you need them to prioritize a fix, you should be able to speak to that person and get them to like canvas for you to prioritize that fix within their teams. So yeah, in summary, find areas of friction, see if you can help developers bypass that friction or make the friction less confusing through documentation or content. If it's a product thing, get them to prioritize the fix so you move past that, and then always surface the wow as soon as you can, like surface the areas of wow as soon as you can to maintain retention.
Now that's actually an interesting point, but it also brings up another angle that I'm curious about. So sometimes when developers build or when companies try to like build their educational resources, they often tailor it around the product. how does this product function, how does this product exist, instead of around the developer experience. And sometimes when they get a developer relations person on board, they often expect that you follow this map that they have already laid out, because to them it's what has been working, right? And so how do you figure out what developers need, and then at this particular point where the team is insisted on a particular pattern to how things should work, or how the documentation or the educational resources should be, how do you also insist that this may be working, but it could be better?
Okay, so it's interesting that this is a conversation I'm having like with a friend, because I joined his startup as like, so I started to call myself something. This is an aside. I started to call myself something. I started to call myself a sense maker. And oftentimes it's more like people usually call me when they're trying to make sense of what they are
Okay,
doing.
yeah, I see the name.
When yeah, when they're trying to like help other people, like sometimes people understand what they're doing, but then they're trying to like help other people understand what they're doing, or like make sense of what they're doing, and they usually call me. And I've been doing that for like a friend with his startup, and this question like ties back to a conversation that we've been having, because like most of his approach is to talk about the product, but really the thing is that, and I need more people to get confident. Like nobody cares about you, your product, what they're doing. People care about themselves. You need to start speaking about them. Like nobody really cares about your product, and I think that's one. Um, in one of my MBA classes, one of my professors said something that has really stuck with me, is that your job as, whether like as somebody who is supposed to whether it's a marketer, like a marketing professional, or at your job as somebody who is supposed to help people adopt a product, isn't to create demand. Is to identify a desire that already exists within this person and funnel your offering through that desire,
That
with
makes
or
more
without
sense.
your products. Like people have desires that they are consumed by, they're thinking about. Now your job is to figure out what that desire is. There's this image that I like a lot, which I use as my Slack profile, is like, is that there's is this person wearing a superhero costume, and the labeling is like, and then there's a box representing a product, and the labeling is like, this is not what your product is. And then on the other slide, it shows that person wearing like that superhero costume, with like their hands stretched out and them all feeling powerful. And the labeling is like, this is what your product is. That person's desire is to feel powerful, is to feel awesome. They don't give a shit what your product is. If your product can help them feel powerful, good, they're going to try it. But you talking of spending the entire time talking about your product, it's not going to get them into the pipeline to say, okay, you know what, let me think about how to, let me even give a damn about this product. It needs
Mm-hmm.
to speak to those desires, those pain points, those things that they need to. And then there's this thing where every time you talk to like a DevRel person and you suggest, mildly suggest, that maybe they pay attention to some marketing or like sales frameworks, they lose their shit like, oh my God, DevRel is not marketing, DevRel is not sales. Yes, it isn't, but we're all going after the same thing. And these people have had like structure for ages to like understand the people that they're supposed to serve. We don't have that structure. You can as
Yeah.
well borrow from the structure that they have. And there's a marketing framework, which is jobs to be done. Instead of asking, what does a DevOps engineer need? You ask something like, what are they hiring your product to do? And what they're hiring your product to do can be something like, oh, I want to be able to ship this code securely without having to change my entire workflow, you
Yeah.
know? Oh, I want to. So you're not thinking about the your product right now, like why your product is so awesome, it does this, is you're thinking about, this is that desire they have. They're not particular about the exact thing that solves that problem. If it's your product, it's fine, but it just, this is the desire they're consumed by, this is the desire they have, this is the job they're trying to get done. And now it's left to you to now funnel all your ideas and all your, and this is really for like both for awareness and like acquisition content, is like funnel all your ideas towards and reframe it towards that outcome of everything that you produce all ties back to showing people that this product can help you ship secure code without changing your workflow. Because at the end of the day, that's the thing these people care about. So you put it in their face so much that it becomes, oh my God, you know what? Yes, let me try this. So it really comes down to you need to get obsessive about the people that you're trying to get into, to pay attention to this tool, the people that you're trying to get them to adopt this tool. You need to be obsessed about them and like what they are trying to achieve. What they are trying to achieve is a lot more important than who they are. Focus on what they're trying to achieve. It's a fairly new profession, so we don't have like a lot of frameworks. We don't have a lot of, set strategies and all of that. Which is why DevRels just get into a role and they're just producing stuff. I rarely meet developer advocates who take time in their first, say, 30 or 60 days to interview one person. When I was at Small Steps, I used to do something that was very strange. I used to join sales calls and really, like, even sometimes I would ask the sales team if I could speak to some of our existing customers. I would just try to like be friendly with them, and because you need to also go and interview the exact people that you're trying to
They're
like
trying
get,
to
because nobody can tell you more about their problems than the people that are facing the problems. So, and I rarely see developer advocates do this, which is like going to actually go and talk. Whenever I join a new team, one of the first things I dedicate my first 60 days to doing while doing other things is like I try to talk to someone new about how they're using the tool, what problems they have, find someone in the community, even find someone who is using a competitor tool. If they are willing to talk to me, I would talk to them too, and find out, oh, like, what is this tool doing for you?
And why
How
is it making your experience
yeah,
better?
exactly. How did it get to the point where you're like, I must pay for this tool? Are there any problems you're having with it? And at the end of that 60 day, I have like a repository of information that should now inform the direction you take. So you're producing outputs that actually drive traction, that actually move something, and not just producing for producing sake. So at the end of the day, when you're asked, what did you do this year? You will not still give the same old answer of, oh, I wrote 16 blog posts. Okay, and so fucking what? Like, what did it do for us? Yeah, so that would be it. Really obsess about the people and the jobs they are trying to get done,
Mhm.
and talk to people, interview people using your tool, interview people using competitor tools. In fact, I think that you should focus more on interviewing people using competitor tools. Really talk to them and figure out what like why they are using the wins, friction, pain points, and all of that. And at the end, you start to see certain things just emerge, and it will give you ideas on like what to focus on.
So I found that really, really profound. And one thing that I picked up is people would actually value your product or see your product as significant if it solves a problem for them. And so basically find out how your product is solving the problem and tailor your
Yeah,
education.
like that's really just it. This is an aside again, has nothing to do with developer advocacy. So as I've been getting more and more into content,
Yeah.
and looking at like, this is not like social media, um TikTok and all of that, and like how companies use social media. I find that a lot of companies spend, like, when they are drawing up like their content strategy and their social media calendar, most of like their topics there is really about the products and all of that. And I wish I could really tell them that, see, I really like, it's why like a lot of brand social media accounts do not do a lot of numbers, because you're bombarding me with your products. Like, you keep posting about your product, but like, I don't care about, nobody cares about your product. If it's not Red Bull and their, staged outsized performances because it's entertaining. Now you're actually solving a problem. You're solving a boredom problem for me, which is why Red Bull content does a lot of numbers, but you keep talking about your product every single day. We've changed our website color to red. Okay. And that's, that's what the brand social media keeps posting about. And that's why like a lot of brand content don't do numbers, because their entire content strategy and content calendar is just about the products, when like you should be talking about people's desires, and then at the end of the day connect that desire to
The
your
product.
product. Yeah. And it's I'm finding out that it's a universal thing actually.
Yeah, that's a really important takeaway from this whole talk. Let's look at something that is very uncomfortable when it comes to DevRel metrics, right? So we all know that a lot of us have been in that situation where you're excited that your article hit 250,000 page views, or your documentation had like 1 million clicks in a space of 1 month, right? But at the end of the day, you now check and that didn't return, or that didn't convert anything. We didn't get any new users. We didn't have any person joining our community in any way. And so, like, which metrics genuinely demonstrate business impact, or like which ones are vanity metrics that look better on dashboard? I think that's like a conflict so many DevRel people struggle with. And I'd like to get more context from you, right? How to differentiate these, and also how to tailor content towards better outcome.
Okay, so as always, I will have to mention that I have an entire chapter in my book dedicated to metrics. Like I probably spend around, that's probably the meatiest chapter, because it's a thing that we try to run away from, even for myself. So the reason I'm obsessive about metrics, it's not even for the company per se, although that gets you're like with metrics, and you're able to like fast track your promotion, you're able to like negotiate your salary if you need to, and all of that. But it's not even for that. It's for my own fulfillment. If I'm at a job and I don't know why I'm at that job, or like what I'm doing in that job, I easily get very dissatisfied. Like that's how I start to get very uncomfortable with the job I'm doing, because it's just like I'm just a cog in a machine, and I can't exactly point to like what I'm doing or like how I'm adding value. So I'm obsessed with metrics, not even for companies. It's more for myself, which is why like in my book the entire chapter 6 is just talking about metrics, how to measure the impact and success of your developer advocacy method efforts with metrics. And it goes on for about 30 pages or thereabout, just covering that. If I were to give a compact answer, because it's not a one, you would notice that across board my answers have not been definitive, and that's because like each company is different. And because each company is different and their goals are different, your role as a developer advocate in different companies will look different. It's not a one size fits all across companies. And so that's why like for questions like this there isn't a definitive answer. There's a
Yeah.
diagnosis that happens before you come at the answer, before you arrive at the answer that is right for the situation you're in, for the company you're in, and for the role that you're in. Okay. That being said, I also do not, I mean, there people call things like website traffic, vanity metrics, blog page views, social media engagement, bounce rate, video clicks, click-through rate, vanity metrics. I don't think they are vanity metrics, but they're not the metrics you should focus on. I think they are signal metrics to tell you if what you're doing is, if it's working.
Yes.
And it's also it will not help you kind of like do further diagnosis. What do I mean by that? Say, for example, you put out a piece of content, you put out a video, yeah, and it has like over 200,000 views, and say 10,000 people click on the link that you have in the video description to maybe go check out the tool or something. And of the 10,000 people that clicked to go check out, then only 2 people signed up and used the tool. Now, that video did well. It's not vanity metrics. It's just not the metrics you should focus on. It did well because it got a lot of views, got a lot of engagement, and it had like a pretty decent conversion rate. But then that's when you now need to get your diagnosis eyes on to look at why is it that 10,000 people clicked and only 2 people signed up. That means there's a problem. You don't have an awareness problem, you have an acquisition problem. So now you start to figure out what is the friction points. Why did these 10,000 people drop off? So for me, those metrics, you should definitely track them. They are very useful in signaling, in telling you if what you're doing is resounding as intended with your audience, if they are vibing with it, if they are connecting with it. Very important metrics, but don't stop there. The mistake that a lot of DevRel teams and people make is that we now stop there. And when it's time for like quarterly meetings, all you're showing is like signal metrics. Great and fine. 200,000 people viewed this, but then, okay, so we're not after views. What we're after is that we want people to, sign up for this tool, use it and see like their monthly active users rising, That's what the business is focused on. So yes, look at what you would call vanity metrics. I would say reframe them to serve as signal metrics. But then you now want to make sure that to demonstrate impact and also position DevRel as a strategic team and as a strategic role, you need to look at quantitative standardized like metrics that are already accepted across the business. So companies would usually look at things like annual recurring revenue. Don't look at that because, DevRel, you're not supposed to look at revenue. Although there are ways to calculate DevRel contributed revenue, but that's just a lot of, it's not very straightforward. You also cannot track everything, but you can estimate. Yeah. But then companies will also look like things like monthly active users, conversion rate, churn, cost of acquisition, customer lifetime value, LTV. You look at, make sure that whatever metric that serves as like your North Star metric or whatever you're tracking points to this in some way. Now, say your company's North Star metric is annual recurring revenue. Now, you can't report on annual recurring revenue because you're doing DevRel, you're not selling, you're not in sales that drives the, except it's like it's a self-serve tool where like it's just sign up, use subscription-based pay, and it's easy to go from point A to point B. And then you can track that through like sign-ups and product analytics and all of that. Perfect. But then if it's like a much more like a team-based tool where there's a lot of process that goes into the adoption and the payment and all of that, then you can't exactly report on like DevRel contributed ARR. What you can look at is you can look at things like, say, number of leads that DevRel generated for sales, things that your company, like find ways to make what you track things that the company already cares about. Like it has to funnel into that. It has to either be that or funnel into that. So you can look at how DevRel is reducing cost of acquisition. This could be through like documentation where or even through your awareness production and your awareness content that you're putting out there. Because you're doing this, if it used to take people 15 days to get to their first get to maybe that like a first product, do something important with the product, and now it's taking them 2 days. That's something closer to like what the company cares about, because if you've reduced that friction, that person is a lot more likely to pay and stay in that tool. So those are things to track. Make sure that like if you're tracking something, let it be that you're tracking something that if you explain it to like somebody like a CEO, he does not need you to further explain, okay, why is this important? Yeah, he will not ask me, because I see a lot of the tracking and where you'd see things like DevRel, this, that, and then even me as a DevRel, you have to explain what that means to me, and you can't take that to like quarterly meetings. Like when you have to explain your metrics, it defeats the entire purpose of the metrics. So it has to be metrics that are already standardized, or metrics that you can point to the standardized one that you don't have to spend a lot of time explaining. So yeah, there's an entire process to it, identifying like the metrics that you should focus on. which is why I said that like there's no one answer to it. It's a diagnosis. You need to figure out what your company's North Star and keystone metrics are. There's a process to it, which is documented in my book. And then you need to pick your own primary DevRel metric and then figure out how your what we're currently calling vanity metrics that I prefer to call signal metrics are contributing to that, and focus everything you do around reporting towards that. And this would change quarter by quarter. Sometimes, you're focused on this
Yeah.
for this quarter, and then next quarter you're focused on something else. But yeah, there's, as with everything strategic, there's a lot of diagnosis just involved. Yeah.
I really like that you changed it from vanity metrics to signal metrics, because I do not agree that they're just vanity, which means they have no significance. Because
Yeah.
on the broader scale of things, they do, right? But I think that also brings us to a different approach around education, right? From something that is just being consumed to something that is supposed to change the developer's behavior entirely. And so, how do we, or how should developer education frame content in a way that it supports the entire developer journey, all the way to the point of converting these people to users?
I think that it goes with so there are two sides to this. When a company starts out, what they're more focused on is not really like, yes, you want to get some people trying the tool, but what they're more focused on is like getting what they're building out there and getting a lot more people like aware of it. So it's coincides with reason that like most of the work you do in that period would be around like the so firstly you need to understand what the developer like journey looks like. There's them discovering your tool either absent-mindedly or like really they're out to like really look for like a solution to a problem that they're having, and they're in discovery mode, and then they discover your tool. There's the consideration phase, there's the adoption phase, and then there's the retention phase. So it would be really figuring out what your own, the tool that you're advocating for, what the developer journey for that tool looks like, and then making sure that you're really creating like buckets of assistance or like buckets of content for each stage. For example, for discovery, you would want to do a lot of like awareness content or like top of funnel content, which is like you need to ask yourself if someone was in a situation where they would consider or like where our tool would come up as a solution,
Mhm.
what would they be looking for? What would they be looking to build? What would they be looking to solve? What kind of engineering problems would they be looking to solve? And then create around that. That funnels into like your discovery, the discovery stage for developers. And then for adoption, you're asking yourself, now that they are considering that this solution can be like this product rather can be a solution to this problem that they were searching for, what is that thing that can get them to wow, that what is that first thing I can do to show them that yes, you're on the right path. And this is where your documentation comes in. It needs to be really easy to scan. It needs to be easy for them to really pinpoint and figure out why they're here. Are they here for the API? Are they here for like a particular integration? You need to be able to make sure that the information architecture of your documentation is very easy to scan through and pick and drop what they want and get on with that. If it's someone that is entirely new to the documentation, your quick start needs to really push out that wow factor. That's what's the quickest and most significant thing I can do with this product to show me that I'm on the right path, solve that. So it's really just separating your what you work on into different contents that really go with the developer journey. And then like there's also like it will also change with like depending like what stage your company is at. For example, and I talked about this in the beginning, say your company is a market leader, like what product would you call a market leader? When you think of like observability, you think of Datadog, yeah, that's the company you work for. At that point, except if you're not working on like new frontier tools and all of that, they're not really focused on like awareness. What they're focused on now is like really retention, drawing out a lot more value from, the people that need them. Because like when people think of observability, Datadog does not contend with like other options. One of the first thoughts is like Datadog. Somebody somewhere must have mentioned it to them, and they're like, should I go try? So they don't have an awareness problem. They don't have a problem of people do not know that we exist. People know that they exist. So they're no longer trying to prove themselves. What they are trying to do, like at that point, is deepen trust and getting people deeper and deeper into the product. So they can increase like their lifetime value. So if you're with that type of company, your most of what you will be working on will be around figuring out how to help more like people that get into the product extract a lot more value from it. That is like surfacing features that they didn't even know existed, surfacing things that they didn't know they could do with the product. And yeah, so it's a layer thing to do, but just make sure that you understand how people get to using your tool. Make sure that depending on like the market position or the growth state that your company is in. For example, like I gave Datadog, you won't be working on, except it's like for a new feature or like for a product pivot or something. You won't be doing a lot of awareness and activation because a lot more people before you have already done that.
Done
Where
that.
you can, extract the most value from is surfacing, producing around things that help people that find the tool extract value from it and stay.
So I really like that you mentioned it depends on the stage of the company. Sometimes people just want to build trust, right? And obviously, we can't ignore the very big elephant in the room when it comes to developer education and the recent AI trend that we're having. Developers are learning in very interesting ways. People don't go to documentation first to learn about tools anymore. They go to any of the AI tools that they have, either Claude or GPT, anyone,
Yeah.
right? And so, how should developer education evolve to meet this new development? And how can teams also themselves work to match up with this recent development?
That's a good question, and that's a question that I am still figuring out the answer to. Um, yeah, but I think it's really so you'll see a lot of teams right now like building their own MCPs of their tooling for so developers can use them in their own AI agents and all of that. So that's one way. Yeah, it's something I'm still trying to figure out. I have an article in the works. I had already written about a hypothesis previously in an article I kind of titled So SEO is sinking, swim or drown. I was trying to like figure out my thoughts around that. I wrote that last year, but now that it's very clear that well, AI is not going anywhere. So I'm trying to like refigure out how I'm thinking about that. But one thing is, I think that when it comes to like information discovery, yes, beyond like building your own, say, there's this really cool tool I saw that I was helping because I do consultations now that I was helping like a company try to deploy to build their own. Mintlify has it too. You can build like an agent out of your documentation that your users can just go and ask questions as they would an LLM, and it will you know be around your entire knowledge base and answer questions the way like an AI will answer, and that's valid. But most of the um things I've seen from like the when it comes to like information discovery, most of the signals we've seen from like the teams at Google, the teams at wherever, it's still that honestly value still wins. Like it's almost like the same way that Google has been surfacing information when it comes to like discovery, which is like value over keyword stuffing or like whatever. The same way it's like it's almost similar to like how AI like LLM surface information. So I would really say like if you're focusing on doing the important things, which is like focusing on value, you really have nothing like you're still on the right track, honestly. Like I don't think that it has changed the discovery, like it hasn't changed like the not the discovery, but like how information is pulled and presented. Yes, the medium has changed now that a lot of people are using like AI LLMs and AI summary, even when they use like search engines like Google, they still read like the AI summaries and all of that. But the way that those information is aggregated and sourced for, I don't think that has changed from everything that the teams at Google, the teams at like, the teams at Anthropic and even OpenAI have put out. I don't think that indexing product, that indexing process has changed. So if you're focused on like really producing value and obsessing about the people that you're producing for, I would say that you're doing a lot more better than a lot of people and like a lot of teams. But hold me to it. I am putting out a blog post, hopefully before the end of this month or like before the end of August, around my how I'm thinking about it now. So I'm kind of look out for that. I'm still putting my thoughts together around that. But yeah.
That's really interesting. And I think, yeah, lots of companies have been digging into developing MCPs for their docs. I think that's a brilliant way to also get original content, even with the use of AI tools at the end of the day. And I know that you have also worked with a couple of companies over the years, but like, what's one mistake you've noticed that has repeatedly showed up amongst this organization, regardless of the size, when it comes to content developer education, and how can it be avoided, or how could it have been avoided?
So I think it's kind of it's the same thing that I did talk about where it's like this obsession about, yes, you should be obsessed about your product, but it shouldn't be what you put out. Yeah. This obsession around product obsessed education and not being obsessed with like this product on its own is not worth anything. It's only worth something when it solves a problem for someone that I want to adopt this product. So what is that problem? It's a thing that across board is like a huge problem. And because it's the way that companies have done it over time, every time you like bring that up, there's this sort of like, like some sort of opposition, some sort of you have to really convince and convince before they give it a try. And then you find out that, oh, yeah, this actually works. And, it's an entire cycle. So I think for me, top of mind is really this obsession with like front loading your product instead of like front loading the problem and then connecting your product as a solution to that problem. It's like sometimes why you land on many developer tool websites and you can't figure out what they do.
Oh, I've
Like
been there.
you spend minutes scrolling and at the end you're still asking yourself, okay, but what is this?
Sometimes you see the alternatives of those projects, and you're like, okay, this explains what you do, but like, what do you do, and how
Yeah,
are you
like
better than your
your team.
comparison?
And then there's this is not even it's not a DevRel thing. I think it's a general industry thing. I don't know why people are, although some teams are doing it now and I really applaud them. People have a problem about talking about their competitors and I don't understand. Like you need to be talking about you need to be really pointing out, and that's why I appreciate like OpenAI and Anthropic and Claude, like the way they go head to head. And sometimes, even their founders are dragging each other and being like, yes, your tool can do this, but can your own do this? A lot of teams and a lot of companies shy away from talking about their competitors because it feels like you're pointing the spotlight at them. But if you're assuming that the people you want to like your users are fools, that they don't know that your competitors exist. They already know. You might as well start telling them why you're a better option than pretending that you're the only, as Rihanna would say, only girl in the world. You're not.
Oh my god, that's so real. That is
So
so.
yeah, I think that those are like the two main for me. Like I'm kind of like important. Yeah.
These are really important points and really good instances, right? But before we wrap up, I'd like you to give audience something to go home with. You join an early stage startup today, and they don't have like strong documentation or tutorials or even an education strategy as a whole, and they're working on limited budget. Where do you start from? What do you do, and how do you make it count?
Great. Honestly, See, where do I start from? I will go and pick up my book and read it again. I'm not even kidding. And that's why this book is like everything. Because when I joined Small Step, this was the exact situation. I didn't exactly even interview for that role. My manager just saw me on LinkedIn and picked me. So I didn't exactly interview for that role. It was I was, as much as, and shout out to my technical editor who has been like my mentor for like a really long time, because I had so many questions. Like I was just, if they just threw me in and like, oh yes, figure out how to do this thing. And so I wrote this book because after doing that for 3 years, and I just realized that, wow, if I had to do this again, I don't want to do that whole gymnastics. I want to be able to have like a resource that I can pick up and really just follow the process. What I would do is diagnosis, honestly. It's figuring out what does this like, how best can I serve this company? And you can't figure that out until you figure out like what position does this company occupy in the market, who are the competitors, who are the target users, who are the decision makers, what's the rest of the team doing, what have they tried, what failed. I would spend my time, at least the first 1 month, just doing a lot of diagnosis, speaking to people, trying to understand. It's only when I now understand that I would try to avoid really just jumping in and start putting things out without like a proper strategy of like understanding, why am I even putting things out in the first place? What are we trying to achieve by putting things out in the first place? And I go back to the example when I joined Small Step, what we were trying to do, we weren't even trying to get people to try the tool.
Yeah.
In the first 6 months I joined, a major problem was that we needed people to just understand what we were doing. That's just it. So a lot of what I worked on that period was just, we only moved on from trying to make sure that people understood what we're doing to like now trying to like draw in like acquisition and get people to sign up and try and all of that, when it was clear that when we were speaking to like people outside, we would now go for conferences and ask, oh, have you heard of Small Step? If you take a minute and look at our documentation, what do you think we do? And people were able to like give us answers that reflected close to or like exactly the problem that we were solving. That was only when we moved from that. So when I joined for the first 6, 7 months, all I was doing was just simplifying things. I would just sit down and just ask myself, what does this mean? Like, what is this trying to do? What does this mean? And that was all I did for like 6 months. It was only when developers started, these IT engineers and like DevOps developers that we were targeting started to like really get back towards that. Oh, this is what you guys are doing. Oh, this is what I can use Small Step for. Oh, this is that we now moved on. So if you really need to like figure out what are the problems we're having right now and how can what I do tie back to that. You don't do anything until you figure that out. Don't just start putting things out for the sake of putting things out. I see a comment here from Vishal. It says, I recently thought of the same thing and created a talk on DevRel versus DevCell, two scoreboards, one developer journey, basically detailing why I agree while sales, engineering, and DevRel should work together. I agree. I have been preaching this since I became like a developer advocate. I haven't seen the reason, why DevRels have this disdain for sales, but like we should all be working together, especially if you're like working with like a company that is a lot more enterprise focused. You should definitely be working with sales. You should be trying to, in my book, I talked about like assist metrics, which is like DevRel is like this connecting role where like you're supposed to like work with teams and you're supposed to like be like assisting other teams to like reach their own goals. So like for sales, you could now even have as part of your metrics something like DevRel assisted sales, because that's what like you're actually supposed to be working with sales hand in hand. You're supposed to be helping figuring out what are the pushbacks that people have when sales is trying to talk to them. How can I create something that would make that process a lot more easier? And then you can now funnel that back and say, oh, this year DevRel did so and so in DevRel assisted sales. I think they're supposed to be a team. Honestly, I've been preaching this and I think that that's great. If you put out the talk, please send it to me. I would like to watch it. If you write about it, please send it to me. I would like to watch it too. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Linda. This has been back to back hot insights, and I'm so happy now. I feel more gingered to get a copy of that book. This sounds like there's a whole
Yeah,
lot of
writing this, so
content.
you can be sure that, like, if you pick it up, let me tell you something. If you pick it up and you read it and you don't extract value from it, reach out to me on LinkedIn and I will send you back your money on PayPal. I'm not even
With
kidding. I spent a
confidence.
year writing this, so you can be sure that it's value packed. And I had one of the best in the game. This is someone that has been like developer advocacy manager for like a lot of like top Silicon Valley companies. I had him review this, and he read this, and what he said was that, wow, this is too good, like in those exact words. So I promise you, pick up the book. If after reading it you don't extract one singular value from it, just message me on LinkedIn. I'll send you back your money. But yeah, it's a labor of love, even for myself. I always make the joke that I have short-term memory, so I document a lot. So this was more for myself than it even was for others. So it's like, if I have to do this all over again, now I find myself every time that I have to like do something, I go and pick up this book before I join some of my consultation calls. I pick
Like
it
you
up
literally
to
created your
yeah,
own
I started from I've literally written. I've put down my brain somewhere so I don't have to
back to the
always,
source.
yeah. So yeah, it's pretty cool.
This is so brilliant, and I really appreciate you for joining us here today. And if this is also your first time seeing a clip of the DevRel Strategy Room, we have more engaging and like interesting topics coming up in the couple of weeks, not days. So please do well to tune in and also follow up on that.
Thank you all. Thank you for having me. Had a lovely time.